Hey, nonprofit fundraisers, welcome to another episode of This Week in Crypto Philanthropy. My name again, Nick Mikhalevsky, Senior Sales Manager here at The Giving Block. And as always, I'm joined by my colleague from Shift 4, Pietro Moran, Director of Crypto. How's it going, Pietro?
Doing great. It's another great week in the books. Lucky number 13, episode-wise, right? Excited to be here and excited to kick things off.
Lots to talk about. Been a busy August. Lots of donations coming through. Lots of great news to share this week. So, with that, we'll kind of, look at today's agenda. Always we'll do the crypto price check. Take a look at some of the stats from just the last 7 days. A lot of great news to share. A few things that I want to highlight. And then we're going to also talk about one of the nonprofits that's done tremendously well in getting their crypto philanthropy ground game going, Pediatric Cancer Research Foundation, or PCRF. And then, of course, we'll end with some crypto industry news. As always, if you want to submit questions to Pietro and I, things that you want us to discuss, there's my email to drop me anything that you want to ask. Maybe we'll feature it on a future episode. But, and as always, we are still offering a $500 in Bitcoin when you get started with the Giving Block. We've extended it again. We've had some great traction with it. So if you are still on the fence, crypto curious, a nice little way to kickstart that fundraising journey with the Giving Block. So with that, I think we'll jump right in. And Pietro, what's kind of been going on in the markets recently?
We've had a pretty interesting week, and it's come in the heels of like the last 48 hours, I would say. But seeing as how this is a weekly show, we do a roundup on the last 7 days. So let's start from the beginning. If we take a look at prices today, we're sitting right around that $59,000 level for Bitcoin. We were actually trading a little bit higher, around 61,000 a couple days ago. But again, I think the theme of the summer, going into the middle of August here, we're right at the halfway point. It's just like everybody's still at the beach, everybody's still on vacation, and I don't think anybody's in any rush to do anything. Last week, we had our good friend Quinn Thompson on from Lecker Capital, who was talking about the markets and a little bit from a macro perspective. Having talked to him offline as well, I think, I would echo his commentary of just saying like, people are slowly starting to position themselves, getting back into the swing of things for the fall, no crazy headlines or movements. And crypto's no different, even though we typically love to talk about how, volatile it is. It can go up, it can go down. It grows at a pretty incredible, like annualized growth rate. On a weekly cadence, we're not seeing anything too crazy. That's going to be true of all the top 10 assets here, which you'll see brought to us from the good people over at CoinGecko. Ethereum's sitting right around 2660. And we have some other things. Solana's been kind of one of the darlings of this, call it crypto cycle. It's sitting right around 145. And honestly, not a ton to report except for, the market is, not throwing a tantrum, but it's also not euphoric. We're just kind of chopping around during the summer while everybody gets their feet back under them and comes back from vacation. So that's pretty much the crypto price check for this week. I think we'll be, excited to see more things happening in the fall, and price will probably become a little more of an exciting topic. But, it's also good that we're not only focused on price, because that's not why we're here, right? This podcast is here for the myriad reasons that crypto is in the forefront of all our minds. And with that being said, I want to kick it back to you because I know you had some pretty exciting stuff to tell us on the donation front. Would love to hear more about it.
Yeah. So over the last 7 days, just wanted to take a little bit of a snapshot here. And as you can see on, some of those headline numbers, some pretty impressive, donations that have come in just across the last 7 days. Over 260,000 from hundreds of supporters, which is always great to see. So even in the dog days of summer, people are still continuing to be very, very generous. Interestingly, like we saw at various points in the year, the stable coins continuing to lead over the last week, being the most donated asset. And, somewhat interesting too. I mean, Bitcoin has certainly been the asset this year, but last week, a little bit more in Ethereum versus Bitcoin. And again, not that it's indicating any, kind of trend. All to say, though, that these philanthropic communities in the industry and around Web3 have really started to pick up, and we've started to see a lot more donations come in from those type of communities, which again are often in the Ethereum ecosystem. So maybe that's a sign of them kind of, I want to say waking up, but increasing their generosity. And as a bit of an aside as well, for those listeners out there that maybe don't know, that aside from direct donations to a particular nonprofit, we also offer something called our impact index funds, and that's where donors can give across an entire category. So what you're seeing across the side of the screen there are all the different funds. Might be a little bit hard to read, but essentially we've got funds that are dedicated to particular categories: arts and culture, animals, the environment, health and medicine. And so donors can donate across an entire vertical, and that is split equally, regardless of size, whether you're the world's largest nonprofit or you're the world's smallest nonprofit. Doesn't matter. All the funds that are donated to that fund are split equally across all the nonprofits in that category. So a nice little extra, little bit of icing on the cake, nothing that's overly transformational, but from time to time, we see some massive generosity that's dropped in those funds where someone just has a passion for giving across an entire vertical. And that could be a nice additional point of impact for not only donors, but for nonprofits themselves. So again, curious about get starting with the giving block. It's not just direct donations. There are all kinds of different ways where donors can give, and that's been really great to see. Which kind of leads into our nonprofit spotlight, and we sort of go back to that point around Ethereum donations starting to pick up. I shouldn't say starting to pick up. I literally have edged out Bitcoin, which is something that has been consistently in sort of like second place. I mean, Bitcoin being consistently, the most donated asset, but wanted to take a moment to highlight Pediatric Cancer Research Foundation, which is a smaller to mid-size organization. And we'll put a link in the show notes here to our newsletter. We do a weekly newsletter as well, where if you saw a little bit of like the intro to this week's episode from earlier in the week, I sort of teased out the fact that we go really deep into these kind of stories, news, trends, donation stats, fundraising tips, all that. But we do a nice deep dive into Pediatric Cancer Research Foundation and what they've been able to achieve. And this is such a cool story. I mean, you can sort of read at the top there, and PCRF, recognize that, crypto donations, had some legs. They knew that there was an opportunity there. And, that really is, I can't tell you how many times when I'm talking to organizations, that is like the absolute start of the conversation every time. It's like, we know we need to do this, but it's new. We don't know what to expect. Is it going to be something really great? Is it not? They just don't know. So there's a little bit of hesitancy. And I had a conversation with a similar organization earlier this week. And, the director of fundraising said, what, at the end of the day, I mean, you can't catch a fish without casting a line. And they're really excited about the potential. And so they are at the start of what I think may be something very similar to this organization, where they really launched their fundraising journey towards the end of the calendar year. So, great time certainly to get started, because as everybody knows, donating these appreciated assets at the end of the year, it's a tax smart way to give. And so within launching, they got their first crypto donation. Fantastic. I mean, that's always awesome to see. But as the years continued on, they've been able to rack up hundreds of thousands of dollars in crypto gifts from the community, and it started to attract the eyes of, different pockets of the crypto community. I'll just kind of read out a couple of these here, and you can sort of see the screenshot, which is awesome to see from Shiba Doge, a meme coin. But, $120,000 from Node Monkeys, $30,000 from Happy Bear. And for those listening, if this doesn't make any sense to you, I mean, what I want to highlight is that these are elements of the crypto sort of community-led groups that are picking an organization to distribute, generosity to based off of like their NFTs or, their kind of philanthropy that's sort of baked into a lot of these communities. And so PCRF has done a great job of just showcasing the impact that these crypto donations have. And they put it out there so regularly. I think they're occupying a lot of the mind share of those crypto communities. And so it's sort of like build on these network effects. And they've really made a name for themselves. So it's going to be really awesome to see how this program continues to grow. So again, if you're a smaller to mid-sized nonprofit out there, and maybe you're kind of curious, the Giving Block works with some of the world's largest. The vast majority of the time, the day-to-day conversations that we're having are with smaller and medium-sized orgs, just like PCRF. So it's a really cool story. Check it out in our newsletter. It's been a fantastic thing to watch. So that kind of rounds out the philanthropy side of things. But again, maybe to sort of bookend sort of everything that's kind of been going on. Pietro, I'll kick it back over to you in terms of what some of the industry news that's been playing out over the last week or so.
Absolutely. I mean, just a quick comment on that. I mean, it's awesome to see the folks at PCRF kind of having their day in terms of seeing the success of their grassroots kind of community cultivation. It's one of those things that kind of always surprises somebody who wasn't a nonprofit professional like myself. I was like, not skeptical, but always just quizzical maybe of like, how's this going to play out? And then you hear these case studies, you read these stories, and you see that even folks that are, pretty limited in terms of their public persona on the internet are just kind of airdropping money out of the sky because they care, but they're, just a unique and differentiated demographic. I always think that's super cool. And actually the one thing before I jump into the updates too, when you were talking about the index funds at the Giving Block, I thought that was really cool because it feels like when you think about the world of like traditional finance, right? We've talked a lot about on prior episodes, ETFs and what they're doing for Bitcoin, the financialization and sort of innovation within the finance space, right? You used to be able to buy single name stocks or equities, and then you could invest in a broad basket of opportunities through one single index fund. I mean, it's cool to see the same kind of innovation come back to the nonprofit space. It's obviously not my lane so much, but it's really cool to see that, folks are pushing the boundary of saying, oh, I want to give to a broad base of thematically aligned nonprofits. I can go do that with one click instead of making 400 individual donations, right? I mean, kind of takes a lot of the guesswork out of it if you're just looking to make a quick impact. So I just want to say that's super cool.
Yeah, and for those listeners out there that are maybe intrigued by that, one thing I'll say is that think of that as kind of like extra icing on the cake. It's certainly not going to be the lion's share of where donations come in from. But the cool thing is that kind of like a rising tide lifts all boats. If there's a larger org that's in that category that's doing a great job at attracting donors' interest and generosity, and that drives someone to want to support an entire category. I mean, if you're in a category with a huge nonprofit, think of that as just like, extra sort of like, I don't want to say like PR for your organization, but it could draw the generosity of other donors simply because you're in the same environmental space, or you're in the same healthcare space, or you're in the same, animal welfare space. So pretty cool. Definitely a great point to bring up.
100%. That's like the lighthearted part of the podcast. It's always the good, like feel good stories. I get to report the news here. So as far as crypto news updates, we've had a couple interesting things. Just this morning, saw a headline, about MetaMask, which for folks who maybe aren't aware or maybe just have heard the name in passing, it's the largest Ethereum-based wallet. So people are using it to hold, trade their assets and effectively manage their entryway into the Web3 and crypto world. Has tens of millions of monthly active users. What they've done is partner up with MasterCard, a household brand, we all know it in payments, to offer a crypto debit card. Why is that interesting, right? And at least from my perspective, I think it's a really cool entry point and a position of what I think is going to be the theme for the rest of the year, which is real world meets crypto or real world meets Web3. All that to say, what this debit card allows folks to do is if they hold a balance of an asset in crypto, it could be stable coins, might be something else. And, more details will come out as they launch the product in earnest. But it allows you to spend down that balance the same way you're spending from, say, a traditional bank account, right? And so what we're seeing is kind of this transition of all of the traditional analogs of like the things that you're used to seeing the banking environment or the payments environment, kind of translating over into a crypto form factor to kind of meet the user where they are, right? So let's just say I might be holding a couple bucks in stable coins, or I might be holding them in Ethereum, and I want to, on a daily basis, monthly basis, whatever it may be, use it for daily commerce and not have to keep moving money back and forth between like bank account, Web3 wallet or crypto wallet. I think that's going to be really interesting. We see a lot of demand for this type of service at Shift4 Crypto. I think it's pretty unique and a trend that we're certainly monitoring pretty intensely. And I certainly think there's markets, I know we're US centric, we're based in the US, Nick, you and I, but a lot of folks across the world don't necessarily have all the banking infrastructure that we're so accustomed to. I think this is a great way for them to leapfrog a lot of the, difficult developments that other nations may have made in the banking sector to make things so seamless. Think of the Venmos and all the other fintech apps that we have, and kind of just get the same kind of experience, but just through a different sleeve, right? Through crypto. So I'm certainly going to be staying on top of this. I think it's really cool. And I'm definitely going to be monitoring it to see kind of what trends happen. I mean, who knows, right? At some point, maybe you could even use that debit card to make a donation. Kind of could come full 360 here. So we'll definitely keep tabs on that. Second item on the news agenda here, for all those who don't necessarily keep up with the finance headlines in the world, which aren't necessarily the most engaging or riveting content. That's what we're here for. Goldman Sachs, there's a forum that traditional banks and investment banks are supposed to file, which comes out at the end of every quarter. They showed in their last filing that they own $418 million of Bitcoin ETFs. That's not just one specific ETF product. They've diversified across a number of them. But that's really interesting. So for folks listening, that doesn't necessarily mean that Goldman Sachs has taken their personal balance sheet or their company balance sheet and bought $418 million of Bitcoin, but it's also reflective of the demand from their clientele, right? So if you're an investment bank and you have a high net worth investor who's coming in and demanding, hey, I want exposure to Bitcoin, we've seen about $418 million of that type of demand. And that's not insignificant, right? We're definitely going to monitor this. I think it's really cool. It's kind of, not to pat ourselves on the back here, but it's kind of one of the things we've been talking about a lot, which is to say like traditional finance is coming into crypto. It's doing it in a big way. And while $418 million isn't huge in terms of, the size of these companies or what they could potentially do, even a small bite at the apple is still hundreds of millions of dollars for these folks. And so I think if you project out the future of the industry, it's kind of an interesting trend to see where we're still in the early innings of it. But, when folks like this move, it's like turning the Titanic, right? It's moving a big ship slowly. And Nick, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but I think it's pretty interesting to watch.
Yeah, super interesting. I mean, it kind of, for anybody who maybe saw last week's episode with Quinn, we talked about how the big brokerage houses and are turning on these products. It's not, these things don't just happen overnight. I mean, I think in the same filings, Morgan Stanley, which has 15,000 financial advisors, just reported an initial, 5-ish million in these crypto ETF or Bitcoin ETFs. And so again, it's those traditional investors that are starting to call out their brokers saying, hey, I'd like to make an allocation, whether they're doing that passively or actively. But for the nonprofits out there, I mean, come this time next year, or certainly at starting January 2025, when some of these ETFs have been held longer than a year, that's where those gifts really start to get tax optimized. So really want to pay attention to not only the space in crypto for the underlying asset, but also the stock donations next year, because these ETFs have performed extremely well. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out over the coming 8 to 12 months.
Totally. I mean, Rome wasn't built in a day. I was actually having an offline conversation and listening to a podcast also from a friend of mine, Jason, who heads up markets at Delphi Digital, which is a crypto native fund. He was talking about how his previous experience at JP Morgan was very similar. He said just to get a institutional investor in the door on a new product might take 6 months, 8 months, maybe a year just to get docs signed. People go on vacation or they have to do their due diligence. We're definitely here for the long game, and we don't want to promise anything in the near future, but these are really exciting and encouraging trends to see, and we'll obviously keep monitoring them as we keep giving out updates every week. So with that said, the last thing I want to talk about, and this is kind of off the heels of coming back from that conference in Nashville I was in a couple of weeks ago, one of the largest US-centric Bitcoin mining companies, Marathon Digital, is or put out a press release saying that they're looking at raising $250 million just to purchase more Bitcoin. So, I mean, there's the folks that double down, there's the folks that triple down, and then there's the folks that raise $250 million to buy more of the asset that they're in the ecosystem of. And for folks maybe unaware, Bitcoin miners are effectively those that upkeep the network and are responsible for the issuance of new Bitcoin. That being said, when you see something like this, granted, they haven't raised the 250 million yet, but I don't think executives at a big company like this are putting that type of announcement out into the market if they didn't think the demand was going to be there, right? These folks are, insightful in the industry, but they're also intelligent in terms of their positioning and their public footprint, which is, again, encouraging. To see fundraising at this type of scale just shows that I think there's an appetite for crypto-related investment. And it's not like they're reinventing the wheel or anything. Buying $250 million of Bitcoin and putting it on your balance sheet is a relatively straightforward value proposition. But it's really just another encouraging thing to watch and see how that offering performs, just because I think we're going to see more of these types of things where, just a couple of years ago, we might have been excited by a $25 million fundraise, and now we're talking about an order of magnitude larger. That's pretty cool. And that kind of wraps up the weekly update. I think just to bookend it and put a pin in it, it's kind of like we're seeing more and more of this stuff happen. And I think the only maybe novel insight is that it's happening in the summer, right? None of this stuff is typically happening when everybody's away. That's not traditional, at least not in my experience, right? It seems like people are really using the summer as a time to build, formulate a plan and a strategy, and talk to folks, educate themselves and their clients or partners for what we hope is a really exciting fall and 2025. So I would just say, I'm biased, but I stay optimistic about the industry. I mean, we're trading at prices that were rarefied air just even in the last bull market. And so I have a lot of confidence and got to temper my own expectations, but I think that we're in a positive direction, seeing all these cool news articles happening in, June, July, August, as opposed to September, October, November, when you're trying to close out the year on a strong note. So what do you think about that, Nick?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from what I can say to close things out, the types of organizations that I'm on the phone with every day, it's really encouraging. It's a huge turnaround. Nonprofits are laying the foundation for the fall. So many more organizations have now put this back on the priority list, and the ones that have got on board this year are doing tremendously well. The giving stats are very strong compared to where we were even just a year ago, and that is certainly in large part thanks to the huge rebound in the crypto markets. A lot of things coming down the pike in terms of macro. We've got maybe interest rate decision in September, and then all the sort of macro events that go into year end, and not to even mention the year end giving season that's going to be in full swing and here before we know it. So to close things out, I mean, really excited to see what plays out for the rest of August before everybody is back in sort of the office. School's back. Everybody's sort of getting ready to close out the year strong. So it's going to be really fun to watch these next few weeks. So with that, on behalf of the team here at Shift 4 and the Giving Block, we'll see you next week.